Let me go ahead and start this episode by saying that Wayne Alexander is approximately amazing. For those of you not aware, he's the gentleman who plays the Inquisitor. He actually returns several times on this show, but each time he actually plays a different role. There were some thoughts going on behind the scenes to have the Inquisitor, Sebastian, return, but JMS ultimately shot all those down, and I think that was the right move to make, personally. Leave his performance as both memorable, which is ironic when you think about it, and as unique in its presentation. You always want to use a good guest star like him, but you want to use him in as many different impacting roles as you can, and he would do some pretty significant stuff later on. I'm reminded in many ways of the gentleman who played... I can't think of his name. He played the defecting Romulan admiral in The Defector over on TNG. That actor, he has played several roles across Star Trek's history, usually to some really good effect. I digress, though. So, there are two plots to this episode, very distinct, clear plots. This is one of the very few truly A-B plot episodes of Babylon 5. We've talked about a few of them as we've gone along. As usual, I think it works in this case. First of all, because each plot is strong enough to really stand on its own. The only downside with the Jikar plot is it is kind of lacking in overall content. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, there's a lot of things right with it, but it doesn't make for an entire hour of television by itself. By contrast, the other one kind of doesn't either when you think about it. There are a few things where corners are trimmed, but overall, the Inquisitor storyline, A, takes up the bulk of the episode anyways, but B, if it was stretched out, would probably just devolve into padding, rather than, actually fleshing out the characters or the setting or the themes or anything else that's going on with that. There's a second reason, though, that I'm okay with the A-plot, B-plot thing in this episode, and that's the fact that both plots do have an underlying thread connecting them, a completely unspoken thread. In the A-plot, between the Inquisitor and Delenn and Sheridan, we see that Delenn and Sheridan both, it's basically a sort of a self-discovery kind of a situation, with some cool stuff scattered as we go through it. In the B-plot with Jikar and the Narn, we see that the Narn are still in the process of discovering who and what they are, especially Jikar himself. You can see, it's hard to explain, and forgive me if I'm just reading too much into this because it's me, but the Narn in general are, like, they start trying to apply their old ways, and then they just kind of, stop, and it's like, well, that doesn't actually work that way anymore. So, they adapt. They change. They redefine who they are. Let's talk about the Jikar plot first, because I have less to say about that. So, first of all, it's interesting to me that Jikar's logic actually does track clean. His whole thought about, if we don't oppose them, they'll just take over whoever else next, that kind of a thing. That is actually a fairly accurate statement, I'd say, really, because that is kind of the viewpoint of most conquering forces in most of fiction. If they conquer someone and everyone else just says, they're probably going to try and conquer again, and, let's not forget, we already know they're conquering again. That was one of the stingers of the last episode. And I hate to spoil for the future, but we'll find out tomorrow. I'm sorry, not tomorrow. Next week. That'd be great, doing one of these every day. We'll find out next week that, yeah, they're definitely going to keep conquering. But the other interesting thing is that he says it in such a crazy manner. He's basically a street crazy. You just see Wario up there, screaming about everything. It almost makes me wonder, in a weird sort of a way, because, we've all heard hell, I've actually seen personally in my real life a street crazy, as the terminology goes. Street craziness is probably not the best way to get across your message, and yet, really, what other options are available to him? It just makes me wonder how many other individuals... It's kind of a Cassandra truth sort of a thing, Oh, I'm telling this thing and nobody believes me, but it's totally the truth. So, I'm really debating if I want to do a spoiler section this week. If I do, it's going to be really small. I think I will. So we'll leave that towards the end. Next note, then. So one of the things they mention is that they want to make sure that the right people are doing the right things for the right reasons. The idea that the person doing the right thing for the wrong reasons would be a bad thing. Now, this is getting into some kind of high philosophy, actually, which I don't actually want to discuss because, frankly, I am way too stupid to discuss something that I actually don't like that much, such as, well, let's just call it psychobabble and move on. But the idea here is, if you do the correct thing for the incorrect reason, does that have any impact on the results, either short-term or long-term? Now, if you were to ask me, what I thought of that right now, I would say, well, it depends. And then you'd say, well, that's not a right answer. And I'll say, but it's the correct answer because it depends. That's what I think. That's how I believe. The idea that it would depend on the circumstances, depend on the person, depend on the action, depend on the reasons, that kind of a thing, right? But I find it interesting, given spoiler things I'll discuss later. Just keep that one in the back of your mind. So the next thing that happens is Sebastian is asked, "Who are you?" That is, of course, the penultimate question here. I don't feel like this is really spoiling to give away the fact that both the Shadows and the Vorlons, the two opponents in this situation, have their own questions. We know the Shadows. What do you want? I don't want to get too much into that, but this question really helps define the Vorlon mentality in so many different ways. Who are you? The idea of... God, I'm just biting my tongue on so many spoilers right now. The idea of how little you matter. But at the same time, the unique appreciation of the fact that you do matter. This is an old analogy, so bear with me. This is my finger, right here. Say, hello, finger. Hello. My finger matters to my overall operation. If I was missing this finger, this one right here, I could survive, but I would be significantly lesser for it. There would be so many different things I would lose the capacity to do properly, not the least of which to do my frickin' job. Controller or mouse or typing. It would be much, much more difficult. Possible, but I would be lesser for it. So does my finger matter? Absolutely. Does my finger matter so much that it can be considered some great destined thing? No, it's just my finger. You see the in-between here? It's the entire idea, it's part of this whole... I hate to use the word socialization thing, but actually that's fairly apt. The idea that every member of the whole matters, but no individual of the whole matters more than anyone else. A total equality kind of a situation. Now, I know that's kind of a bad analogy, because obviously certain things matter in different ways than other things. My heart, for example, arguably matters more than my finger. But I would still be lessened by the loss of my finger. You see where I'm going with this? So, the Vorlon mentality, who are you, is trying to identify your role, in my estimation, my speculation, my perception, your role in things, your role in the great machine. The Inquisitor himself, Sebastian, actually flat out says, you are just another piece of the machine. He actually uses the same analogy I'm using, except with machinery instead of body parts. And, you are the nail to be hammered down. Bang, bang, bang. I find that ironic, because, really, that's kind of accurate, isn't it? I just realized I'm not talking about the Jikar plot, aren't I? I just realized that. I'm just going down my list of whatever. If you pay attention... I'll just keep going. If you pay attention to everything Sebastian says, especially your second time viewing it, everything he says kind of takes a different light. I will freely admit I didn't catch everything my first time watching this. But the second time, knowing everything, he phrases everything very particularly. He gives away facts about himself, but doesn't say who he is. He tries to incline towards the chosen mentality with her. By the way, funny anecdote. The chosen thing for Delenn, this is not the first time it's cropped up, and it won't be the last either. This is not some kind of plot thread that came out of nowhere. Delenn has, in many ways and many times, believed in destiny, and believed that she had some great role to play in that destiny. She has had... a belief in being chosen, I think, is the actual best way to put that, as the Sebastian himself says. And the overall Inquisition, I just have immense praise for it. The directing, the acting, the writing, it's all phenomenal. He gives away the answers to everything he's asking in the way he asks them. And it's interesting because the whole point isn't really to pass the test per se. If I can diverge for a second, I have often disagreed with the policy of testing in U.S. schools. To explain what I mean by that a little bit better, and I'm not sure if anything backs this up. This is just my own personal belief. But if you sit, cramming for a test and trying to go down, it's like, okay, I got to remember all this crap in order to fill out a paper that says, multiple choice or fill in the dots or whatever. I don't think that really teaches you anything. Now, of course, I'm referring to that type of test. There are other type of tests where you can demonstrate knowledge. There's actually a term for that. It's like a practical test or whatever, which I'm totally okay with. But just sitting down and writing down a thing, my biggest personal perspective, and again, this comes from my own perspective, of why I don't think that really helps teach you anything, is because you're not trying to learn the material at that point. You're trying to pass the test. You know you're being tested. There's a test in front of you, and you want to pass it. It's not about, did you learn about history, or do you want to learn about history, or do you want to learn about math, or do you want to learn about science, or whatever else. It doesn't matter. What matters is passing the test. I find this interesting because I don't think that really matters to Delenn, because of Delenn's mindset. For her, it's not really about passing the test. That would be relatively easy, actually, because again, he kind of gives away what he wants from it, but she has to mean it, and her own sense of honor and her own belief in her own, the way she thinks and the way she feels, prevents her from simply giving him the answers he wants and moving on with it, right? Except, at the same time, she admits, towards the end, that she has no idea what the rules are. She doesn't know how to pass the test. Now, in her defense, I'm sitting here comfortably in my chair watching an episode. She's on a floor being tortured after having not eaten or drunk for God knows how long. So, it's easy to understand that she wouldn't really put two and two together. But the point I'm bringing up here is, even if she knew, I don't think Delenn would try to cheat and just give away the answers. The whole point is about actually being the right person, at the right place, doing the right thing for the right reasons. After all, even if the Vorlons approved or disapproved of her, Delenn needs to approve of Delenn. She needs to know who she is. So while the Vorlons and I don't actually agree on a lot of things, but I kind of get where they're coming from with that overall question. It's something I found myself doing, and I would love to know if any of you guys did this too, where he first asked the question, who are you? And I started thinking about it. Admittedly, I had just reread Order of the Stick recently, and there's actually a very awesome comic. I'm not going to spoil anything, but suffice to say, one of the main characters had to define who he was, and all the answers he kept giving were insufficient. Is this all you are? A race? A class? A character? A selection of stats? A few facts about you? Remember, all the facts Sebastian gave away didn't actually say who he was. They were just facts around what he was. The Vorlons are... he gives it away right at the beginning. And the idea of who you are, it was a fascinating question. So I'd love to know how many of you out there started thinking about it. Who am I? I'm not going to tell you, of course. But, reciting the question for yourself, trying to come up with what answer you would give while avoiding the trap falls in the usual ways we define ourselves. I love his reaction to her. He's grilling her, and she's like, the world is wrong and Delenn is right. And he's like, what if Delenn is wrong and the world is right? Have you thought about that? And she hesitates and says yes. Again, being honest. She is being open and honest. She wants to pass this for herself as much as she does for her people, for her cause, and for the Vorlons. She says, yes, sometimes I've questioned. Watch his face when she says that. He is actually, in my estimation, based on the actor's performance, genuinely surprised that she admitted that. And then, moves on based on her answer. There may be some hope for you after all. This brings me to the big question. I've heard this debated many times, actually. And I, as ever, want to hear your thoughts on this. Is Sebastian a sadist? Is she right? Does he take enjoyment from grinding down others as he was ground down? She's basically guessing, wildly lashing out at her captor, but she's right. He believed he was chosen. He believed he was doing some great divine plan. He believed that he was making the world a better place, that he had some great destiny. And yet, in the end, he was shown how worthless all of that was. Especially given some spoiler stuff I can't give away. But suffice to say, from what we know about the Vorlons, he was shown how all of that was worthless. How he was absolutely inconsequential and absolutely wrong. He was nobody. Who better to try and break down other people to see if they think they are somebody, or if they are willing to accept being nobody? That brings me to... I guess I haven't... Hang on, before I go on. I'm not sure I think he's a sadist. It's hard to define, but at the same time, when he uses the cane on her and Sheridan, there's never anything like joy or enjoyment. I'm not saying that makes what he's doing right. Like I said, I disagree with the Vorlons on many things. But I don't think he's taking pleasure from it. That's just my take. It's just my impression. But as ever, please feel free to give your thoughts and arguments on this. Like I said, I've heard this one point, was Sebastian a sadist, argued many, many times in my ears. And then, of course, Linear is absolutely part of the test. We all know that, especially since he was trying to test Sheridan as well and admits to it. I love the fact that Linear is the perfect person to show up for it, because Linear knows there's only one person willing to defy Kosh, and that's Sheridan. That'll be important later. I hope you remember it. But she gives this great speech at the end. You cannot touch me. I've actually remembered that quote more than once in my real life. For my enemies, for people who have tried to hurt me and my family. You cannot touch me. It sounds hollow when you're suffering. But I would be lying if I said it did not grant me some small comfort, knowing that it was true. Ultimately, in the end, the only one who decides what hurts me, the real me, is me. As an aside, the Jack the Ripper twist was brilliant, and especially because of the fact that it does make a lot of sense, and it is a nice twist in the character, and it's woven directly into the plot. It's pretty much the overall point of the plot. Because Jack, as he is presented here, believed he had some great and glorious destiny and filth and fear. He even mentions this early on when he first shows up and looks down at people and is like, oh, nope, nothing's changed. Everything's still horrible. If I could segue for just a moment before we talk about the Jikar stuff that I meant to talk about earlier. Anyone out there ever play Final Fantasy Tactics? One of my favorite themes of that game, if I ever do a rumination, I'll talk about this in more length, is the you are who you really are when you are alone in the dark theme that runs throughout Final Fantasy Tactics. We see this in many cases with many characters, but my favorite is the two main characters, Delita and Ramza. I'm not going to give away too much, but we see that Delita is willing to do great heroic things when it's nice and obvious. When he's out in the open and everyone praises him for it and lauds him as a hero, and he does horrible, despicable, dark, vicious, manipulative things in the dark. Ramza is forgotten. Nobody knows who he is. No, well, that's not true. Very few people knows who he is. He doesn't get any praise. He doesn't get any reward. He gets nothing. But even when he is alone in the dark, he still strives to do the right thing. I've always liked that theme in its own right. And I don't have much else to add to that, but I did like the fact that that was pretty much the overall theme of, well, most of this episode, really. Which brings me to the Jikar stuff. It's interesting to see Jikar's mentality shift a bit to what is effectively a guerrilla fighter. I also love the way he interacts with Garibaldi. He's blunt with him, he's got no time, and he's obviously hurting, but Garibaldi says, look, I'm just going to hit you with the hard line. And Garibaldi up front says, no, this is how this is working. Now, the thing I like about that is that's exactly what you do to a Narn. You don't simper, you don't simmer, you don't dance around the topic. You say, here, that'll get their respect. And you'll notice Jikar says, fine. And he goes ahead, and I love this, he goes ahead and acquiesces to no more weapons, even knowing what that will mean to the people back home. He still says, all right. I love that because, once again, that's part of the theme, isn't it? Who you are when you're alone in the dark. Now, I know you're like, well, how does that tie in? Because Jikar didn't know that would work out for him. Who you are when you're alone in the dark isn't just about other people's reactions to you. It isn't just about how other people judge you or think of you or look at you. It's about not knowing things will work out. Being willing to do the right thing, even if it is going to hurt you. Even if it's not going to work out. That's being who you really are when you're alone in the dark. And Jikar did that. And Garibaldi says, awesome. And then he basically hands him a way to smuggle the weapons on a silver platter, having already prepped all that info ready for him, on the hope that that would be the way the conversation went. And Jakar's face afterwards is brilliant. You can see he lights up. He's like, because he just thought he just lost all those weapons for all those people back home. But instead, he has now gained a secure method to get them back. It's actually easier now. He has gone up rather than down. You follow? This is not the first time this has happened. But I took a note each time it happened in this episode. This is yet another time in which Jikar has found out that his working with other people is working for him. I mentioned that the idea of asking for sanctuary would be abhorrent to a Narn, and they generally don't seek alliances and outside aid because it would be a sign of weakness. Here Jikar is starting to see, to put it as bluntly as I can, the values of cooperation. Because now he has cooperated and Garibaldi has cooperated right back. Jikar just made Garibaldi's job a lot easier and a lot better. Really, he did do him a favor there. So Garibaldi's like, I can make your job easier and better too. I can do that too. We've all got our job thingies, you know? I like that. Then we go to poor Vir. The worst part of it is the fact that I plan to do a discussion about this at some time in the future, but Vir's awkwardness, that awkward silence, that's not because of fear. That's not because of bias. That's not because of any racial prejudice. That is the sound of shame. Vir says it himself, I tried to talk to them, but they never listen. The fact that Vir, who has no real political power at all, and no real power whatsoever, nevertheless tried to convince this situation to not happen, says something about him and the way he functions, and that will continue to be part of his character arc going forward. But it also says something about how much he felt what happened was just wrong. And then Jikar pulls out the knife, and just for a second you're like, cuts himself. Dead. And Mr. Katsulas, I really hope I'm pronouncing his name right, does it perfectly. He sounds like he's about to dissolve into tears as he himself is remembering the millions dead. And Vir is so honest with him. How do you apologize to them? I can't. It is interesting to see the variance in the Narn. I mentioned earlier about how circumstance is shaping the Narn. We have actually seen in a previous episode how the Narn, for lack of a better term, dissidents would deal with Jikar. They actually, tried to pretty much completely disobey him, and then openly attacked him and nearly killed him in open combat. Here, instead, they walk forward. There's hesitance, there's fear. This is a wounded animal speaking. And instead of attacking Jikar or trying to challenge his authority, they say simply, if we can't even communicate with home, how can we get weapons to home? It's a very reasonable, quiet, logical answer. A very moderated response. And that more than anything chilled me, to be completely blunt, because it showed just how badly the Narn had been hit by this war. That they're willing to shift their mindset that hard and that far. Because the question is not unreasonable. It's a great question, actually. And it's one that should have been answered. And the best part is, this is another time where that whole cooperation thing comes in. Jikar has been cooperating with his alliance, the Sheridan and Garibaldi and all them several times now, and Delenn too. And he has already seen the benefits of that. If someone else had taken over, they wouldn't have been able to get that message from Homeworld. Jikar could, because he had connections they didn't. He had power they didn't, because he was willing to embrace things they haven't gotten to yet. It is through his alliances, through that value of cooperation, that he is able to pull off something that he otherwise wouldn't be able to. Now, he did luck out, because Sheridan had access to the Rangers, and yet, it still worked out, and it solidified the situation. And it's funny to me, because Sheridan and Garibaldi rather bluntly and coldly discuss what would happen if Jikar failed in this, and yet both of them agree they'd rather have Jikar than some other guy. Not only is he someone they know, but as was demonstrated in this episode, Jikar is the person who's willing to cooperate with them as much as they're willing to cooperate with him. It's a nice touch. Okay, so let's get to the spoiler stuff. Let's go ahead and hang on. I'm not going to do a sound effect, just this once. Maybe one sound effect. I don't know. I'll decide later when I'm editing this. But ba-boom, ba-boom. Is that a good sound effect? This is your spoiler warning, by the way. If you don't remember, it's been a while since I've done a spoiler warning. So the Vorlons remind me a lot of the Titans over in Warcraft. The Titans and Titankin, Titanforged, excuse me, have a mentality where only Titan lives matter, or Titanforged lives matter. What happens to the mortal races and the lesser races doesn't actually bother them that much. I bring this up because it was mentioned more than once that Delenn might actually die here, and it is heavily implied that all the previous people that the Inquisitor inquisited, it's a new word now, died. Or, worse, really. And it is mentioned flat out that the Vorlons had been looking for this person for a while. Centuries, actually. This brings up so many questions immediately. First of all, it's really insidious that they pretty much flat out say that the Vorlons have been directly manipulating Earth history for so long. I know that we're in the spoiler thing, so we know that now that we're saying that. But even at the time, that was a hell of a foreshadowing. Which is funny because it actually follows through in the next episode. In the next episode, we get something much more blatant and apparent about how much the Vorlons have been manipulating history. But the thing that really struck me here, and the thing I wanted to talk about, such as it is that the Vorlon, and one of the things I disagree with the Vorlons in, it's that whole social community thing. Everyone matters equally, which means sacrifices mean nothing. The death of Delenn would have meant nothing to the Vorlons. The death of Sheridan would have meant nothing to the Vorlons. They are willing to spend centuries waiting, trying to find the perfect person in order to be able to lead their latest war, their latest skirmish with the Shadows. Because remember, this isn't their first time. It probably wasn't supposed to be their last time either, if you pay attention to a few things. That's speculation, though. And I fully believe that if they had found the perfect leader, back in the previous centuries, they would have just put him on stasis, just like they did with Sebastian. I do wonder if they did let Sebastian finally die, though. What do you guys think? Either way, I'm going to go ahead and pop off to next week's episode. It's a doozy, isn't it? See you around, guys.